So just pay really close attention to that. It takes a little practice at first. And then notice that chain works here as well. So we can do kind of neat stuff like this. If I move, you see how it actually snaps to the tangent? And I can make these nice smooth curves, drawing several continuous arcs if I like. So let me escape out of there. Now I want to kind of clean things up a little bit here. So I'm going to escape all the way out of the command, zoom out just a touch, select all of these walls that I've drawn, but be careful because if you look at my ribbon right now, it says modify multi-select. So this tells me that I've actually got more than walls selected. I have several objects selected. So I'm going to go to my filter button. And in fact, I also have elevations and views selected. And I don't want those selected. So I'm going to uncheck both of those, make sure it's only walls that I have selected, click OK, and then I'll press the delete key on the keyboard to delete those walls. I'm going to return to the wall command, click the button or type WA. And let's take a look at the properties next. Now, I'm going to talk about location in a future movie. Let's take a look at the level constraints here. There's a base constraint, and this establishes the lower edge of the wall. Now, it defaults to level 1 because as you can see down here in the project browser, we are currently in the level 1 floor plan. So that's pretty logical that that's where the wall would start drawing from. Now, we also have levels 2, 3, and roof. So over here under top constraint, we can actually attach the top edge of the wall to any one of those levels. So I'm going to attach it to the level 2, and I'll just draw a small wall right there. I'm going to press escape one time, change this to up to level 3, draw a second wall, escape again, and then one more time up to level roof. Now, if I escape all the way out of that command, scroll down on the project browser and double click the south elevation. Let me just zoom in just a little here so that we can read the levels over here. You can see my levels indicated here. This is not a one-time operation that we just did there. What we've actually assigned is a constraint. So the top edge of this wall is constrained to this level. The top edge of this wall is constrained to this level. If one of these levels were to move, I'm just going to take level 3 here and just drag it manually with the mouse. You can see that the top edge of that wall follows along with that. So this is a really powerful feature in the software that as your design changes over time, you can make sure that all of the walls that are associated with a particular level move accordingly. That can be a very powerful way of working and can be quite a time saver. All right, so let me return to level 1, and let's look at one last setting here for the walls. Go back to the Architecture tab, click on the Wall tool again, and at the top of the Properties palette, we have our Type selector. I'm going to open that up, and I'm going to scroll to the top of the list. Now here it says Basic Wall, Generic 8-inch. Basic Wall is in this gray bar here. That's the name of the family. And then Generic 8-inch is a little further down on the list. Right here, Generic 8-inch. That's the type name. You can see here that the basic wall has lots of types. We have a whole variety here. We have brick and CMU walls. We have generic walls. We have stud walls. So what would happen if I chose one of these other types of walls, like maybe this brick on CMU? And I'm going to draw that. Let me roll my wheel here and zoom in just a touch. All we really see is that that wall is a little bit thicker. So that tells us that something is different. But what I actually want to see is the makeup of that wall, the construction, the internal components. If you look down here at the bottom of the screen, this is our view control bar down here. Several little icons, the scale, and several other things. There's this little white square here, and if I click on it, it says coarse, medium, and fine. If I go to either medium or fine level of detail, it will show me the internal structure of that wall. So coarse only shows the outlines, but the medium and fine, let's zoom in just a little bit more, that starts to show me how that wall is constructed. So now if we choose some of these other wall types and draw them, you can see that they vary from one another in their composition and what they're made of. So there's a lot of different settings that we can interact with as we're drawing walls. We have our shapes up on the Modify tab, and we have a variety of settings to control the height and the composition of the wall on both the Type selector and the Properties palette. So I encourage you to spend a little bit more time in this file playing around and getting comfortable with how walls work, because as we said at the start of the movie, walls are really the most basic component of any Revit project. And to show you the length increment snapping feature, I need to zoom out a little bit. So the easiest way to do this is to use the zoom out 2 times command right here. So if it's already chosen, you can just pick it off the list. Otherwise, you can choose it here from the drop down. and that will back up the screen a little bit. Now in the Architecture tab, I'm going to go over here to the Wall command, or type WA, then just going to click any start point. Now, you'll notice that the temporary dimension says 0, so Revit just always snaps relative to whatever that first point you click was, so it indicates that is 0. I'm going to slowly start to move my mouse a little bit, and what you'll see is it's sort of jumping. It doesn't move fluidly, it sort of jumps, and if you look carefully at the dimension, you'll see that it's jumping in 4-foot increments. This is the length angle snapping behavior. If I click my second point, that wall is exactly 48 feet long. Move in another direction. Okay, now that wall is 16 feet long. It works at any angle, so I can do it along angles or straight lines. We're going to press escape. If I zoom in, I'm using my wheel to zoom in, click a new point and start to move. Notice that the increment has changed. Now it's much more fine. It's going to every 6 inches. Now without even clicking, I'm going to go back to 0 and zoom in a little bit closer and move again. And I guess I got to go a little closer still. Sometimes it takes a little practice to get the right increment. There it is. You can see that now it's doing every inch. Okay, so now if I click, that wall is exactly 4 foot 10 inches. If I continue to zoom in very close, and I just use my wheel to do that, now you'll see that I'm snapping to every 1/4 of an inch. So what's really handy about this feature is just simply in the course of your zooming in and out, it will adjust the degree to which it's snapping. So you don't have to go back and change a setting. It sort of does this automatically. Now, where is this controlled? I'm going to do ZF on my keyboard for zoom to fit, just to back out all the way again. I'm going to go to my Manage tab, and it's the Snaps dialog right here that controls this behavior. So I'm going to click on that. And right here at the top, this is the feature that we just witnessed. It's the length dimension snap increments. Now you'll see here that there's a number. The first number says 4 foot and then a semicolon, and then it says 6 inches and a semicolon. So the semicolons separate one increment from the next. You can change any of these values and you can introduce new values. So if I wanted to add a 2-foot snap increment, I could put it right there. You don't have to actually put it in order. I can just simply click OK. If I go back to snaps, notice that it reorganizes it and it put the 2 feet in the right sequence. Now, let's see how that behaves. If I go to Architecture, click on the Wall command, right now, you can see that at the level of zoom I'm at, I'm getting a 2-foot increment. Now, notice that if I get nearby some other geometry, that takes precedence. So in addition to the length angle snap, Revit will always look at nearby geometry and try to snap to it. So in this case, I'm getting something with a fractional increment, clearly not on a 2-foot increment, but if I move past that, then it goes back to the 2 feet, okay? And again, if I start to zoom, I would get the different increments. You can also remove increments if you don't want to snap to all of those. So all of that is controlled in that dialog. Also in that dialog, we see object snaps. Now, if you've used any CAD program before, then object snapping is a familiar concept. All this geometry has certain key points. We have endpoints at either end of a line. We have the midpoint halfway between. We have quadrants on circles. We have perpendicular and tangent points. You can snap to any of these things. I'd like you to note here in parentheses that each of these items has a keyboard shortcut. So if you remember those, you can actually use those on screen when Revit's trying to snap to a point that you don't like. You can tell it, no, I meant the endpoint, or no, I meant the intersection, by simply typing those letters. Maybe just jot these down or take a screen capture to keep it handy, but they're pretty easy to remember because they all start with the letter S. So let me click OK here, and let's see how this behaves. I'm going to zoom in slightly with my wheel. Let's go to Architecture. Let's click Wall. Right there, that little square, that's endpoint. And then here, the little triangle, that's midpoint. And then if I come over here and you see that little X right there, that's intersection. So the symbols will become familiar to you with practice, but each of those little symbols indicates a different kind of snap. Now, suppose I'm coming over here and it's trying to snap to the endpoint, but I really wanted the midpoint. This is where I could type SM, snap to midpoint, and as I move around now, you'll see that it's only seeing the midpoints of the various objects that I try and snap to. After I click, it goes back to looking for everything. So that override with the keyboard shortcut is for one click only. And so with a little practice, you'll get the hang of those. They'll become an important part of your arsenal. But both the length increment snapping and the object snapping are tools that you'll just use intuitively all the time as you're working. So the features are sort of there in the background all the time, but just keep in mind that you can override the behavior either by going to the snap dialog and putting in new increments, turning on and off object snaps, or using the keyboard shortcuts to override on the fly as you're working. Most elements in Revit have both instance and type properties. Walls are no exception. Some of the behaviors that we witness with walls are driven by each individual instance, and some are controlled at the type level. If you change something at the type level, it changes all instances of that wall. So in this movie, I'm going to look at some examples of each kind of property. And I have here on screen a file called wall properties, and I've annotated the file to indicate the location line feature. In the previous movie, we looked at a lot of the settings of the walls, but we haven't covered the location line feature yet. So let's start with that. Now this wall right here is just one of the default wall types. It's the exterior brick on CMU wall, and it has a base constraint of level 1, and it's unconnected at the moment. But right here is the feature I want to focus on, location line. And if I open that up, you'll see that there are several options for that. Now, I've indicated them here with these lines. So the center line of the wall should be fairly straightforward. That's just the halfway point of the overall thickness. You can see in this particular wall that it ends up sort of in the middle of the CMU somewhere. We've got our finished face exterior and interior, and I'll talk about how Revit knows it's interior exterior in a few moments. But notice these three red lines are indicating the core. The CMU in this case is the core of the wall. Now, what we mean by core in Revit terminology is this is the part of the wall that's actually structural. This is the part of the wall that's holding up the wall. The stud and the drywall are just finishes. The brick and the insulation are also exterior veneers. Those are finishes. But it's the CMU that's actually doing the heavy lifting. That's what's keeping this wall up. So we can actually identify the interior or exterior faces of that core or the center line of the core as well. And that gives us our 6 possibilities. Now, if I switch to this view here called wall types on the project browser, I have that same wall 4 times. And what I'm going to show you is what happens when we change those location lines. So let's take this wall, it's currently wall center line, and change it to finished face exterior. I'll take this one, change it to finished face interior. This one here, I'll do core face exterior. And this one here, maybe I'll do core center line. It doesn't really matter which choices I choose. Now notice the grips move to those locations. So there it's in the center of the core. Here it's on that outside face. Here it's on this inside face of the core. This one over here, it's on the inside face. Now, what we'll see here, if we study this wall a little bit more carefully, and I'll zoom in just a touch to show you that, is the brick is actually on the inside and the drywall's on the outside. That would make for a rather strange building. So the other thing I want you to see here about the location line is that's where the wall will flip. So the little flip grip here allows me to change the orientation of the wall and flip it around and put the brick on the correct side. In this case, it's going to flip by this outside edge. And then this one is going to flip by the inside edge. And you can see it's a pretty dramatically different effect. So the location line works together with the flipping behavior to help you control how the wall shifts. Now, the other place that the location line is important is if you actually change the thickness of the wall. So if I scroll down here and I choose a different wall type, I'm going to choose something that's much thinner than the current wall, like this generic 6 inches. Notice that it still maintains the center of that core material, so most of the thickness was removed from the outside. So those are all examples of instance-based properties, but they have an impact on the overall layout. Now, what about a type-based property? Well, the fact that this wall has CMU and brick and drywall is all controlled at its type level. So let's take a look at how we access those properties. I'm going to select any one of these walls. The thing about type properties is you don't have to select all of them in order to make a modification. You simply select one of those walls, and then here on the properties palette, we have an edit type button, and I'm going to click that, and that will load the type dialog. Now, there's a variety of settings we could change in here, but I'm just going to focus on a couple. Under structure, I have this large edit button, and if I click that, you will see a table that lists out all of the various components in this wall. The exterior side is at the top. The interior side is at the bottom. So that's how this wall knows which way is interior and which way is exterior. And you can see on the exterior side, we have our masonry brick. Let's actually widen this window here so we can read those layers a little bit better. So masonry brick is on the outside. We have an air gap. We have our insulation. Structure, here's our concrete masonry units. Notice that the structure is between the core boundary here in layer 5 and layer 7. Now, layer 5 and 7 are just representational. There's zero thickness, but that indicates where the core starts and ends. And so any element that you put between those two is considered part of the core. And then that's further emphasized over here by this structural checkbox, and that's checked on to show us that that's actually the structural component. And then, of course, the finished materials on the inside of the wall are listed over here. Now, what if I did something rather dramatic? Suppose I took the substrate and I deleted it, and I took the finish here, number 8, and I deleted that, and I click OK. I'm going to click OK again. What you'll notice is on all 3 walls, that interior finish was removed. That's what we mean by a type level modification. Let me show you another quick type level modification. If I go back to edit type, let's do the coarse scale fill pattern. In a previous movie, we talked about coarse, medium, and fine, the level of detail. Well, here, the coarse scale fill pattern is something that gets applied only when the coarse view is displayed. So I'm going to scroll down here, and I'm going to choose a solid fill pattern. But instead of leaving it solid black, which might be a little too bold, I'm going to choose this bluish purple color. Click OK. Now notice that nothing changes. I'm going to deselect the wall. Well, that's because I'm currently in medium level of detail. So let me go to coarse. And what you'll see is, again, all 3 of those walls take on this color. So those are 2 examples of type level modifications that can be performed. Now, naturally, deleting layers in a wall is something you want to think about carefully before you do it. And perhaps you want to rename the wall as well. So really, this is just more of an exercise to kind of show you the possibilities and to help you to understand what it means to be a type level modification. But both types of properties are properties that you'll be using frequently in your Revit work. So when you select an object, just be sure to pay attention to what's available on the properties palette. And remember that if it's right here on the main properties palette, then it's controlled at each individual object. If it's here in the edit type dialog, remember that it's controlling all instances of that type. So it's a more global change. And if you keep both of those tips in mind, then you'll be fine as you use both of these settings throughout your work. What I'm working with here is a file called Locating Walls, and all it contains is the outline perimeter of the unit. And what we're going to focus on is the interior partitions. We'll start on the Architecture tab with the Wall tool. You can type WA or you can click on the tool. And over here on the Properties palette, I want to change the wall type to an interior type partition. And so there are several different sizes here, and I'm going to choose this one, 4 7/8 inch partition. So that's roughly a 5-inch partition, and it's basically a stud with a layer of drywall on each side, which is pretty standard interior construction. Now I'm going to leave all the height settings. It's going to be going up to level 2, and I'm going to stick with the center line location line. I find that to be the most logical choice for interior partitions. Now, if you move your mouse near an existing wall, what you'll see is that Revit will automatically snap to that geometry. So it's finding the center line of this wall, and it's even giving me a little temporary dimension here. Now, I'm not terribly concerned with the exact number. Roughly 10 feet is close enough. So I'm going to click right at that location, move my mouse down to about right here, and then pull it back over in this direction here. I didn't actually do that terribly precisely. I just sort of roughed in the shape that I was after, and that might be a little bit surprising to you. But I want you to recall that the Revit approach to layout is to sketch and then modify. So we rough it out in roughly the configuration we're looking for, and then we come back and we modify it using a variety of techniques. And so on that basis, I also need something about like this, and a couple walls right here, and a little closet in this location here. And what you'll see is I can very quickly lay out this entire half of the floor plan without too much effort being expended. And then I can simply come back and make additional modifications. I actually need one more wall in this location right here, which is going to eventually be a bathroom area. So that's my rough layout for this side of the plan. Let me cancel out of the command using either the modify tool or double escape. And now let's start to clean up the layout. And I'm going to use temporary dimensions as the first way to do this. So I'm going to start with this wall right here. When I select that wall, you may recall from some of our previous movies that temporary dimensions will appear. You may also recall that Revit chooses the witness line locations by default, and in this case, we can see that it goes to the center line of each of these walls. Now we have these little grips right here that Revit displays for us, and if you recall, we can select those, and each time you click on them, they actually move the witness line location to a new location. So I'm going to click those several times until it goes to the inside faces of that space right in there. And you can see that it's giving me a somewhat random dimension right now, 9'7" 7 1/8" in my case. Your result may vary slightly. Well, I'm going to just click in that number and put in 9 feet. And the wall that I have selected will move to that new location. I'm going to repeat the process here with this wall. Click the witness line grips to get it to the insides of this bedroom. Select that number and make it 10 feet. And that will again move that wall. Now here's a very common mistake that a lot of folks will make. They now want to set the size of this closet here, and so they immediately go to this dimension and put in their new number. But what you'll notice is the same wall that I had selected just moved and actually messed up the number that I previously typed. So I'm going to select that number again and reset it back to 10. What did I do wrong? Always remember to select the object that you want to move. Notice that gives me a new set of dimensions. They're to similar points. So I'll click my witness lines. And now I can click in here and make that 8 feet. So it's really important that you always start by selecting the object that you actually want to move before you edit the dimension. Now this is moving along just fine, and I could continue in this fashion to position the rest of the walls, but it might be feeling a little tedious to have to constantly move those witness lines. So what I want to talk about next is a setting that we can modify to change the behavior of our temporary dimensions. In the background here, up here at the very top of my screen on the QAT, I have my switch windows command. And in the background here, I have another file open called temporary dimensions. And this file is included with the exercise files if you want to open it up. Or you can just watch here because really this file is just about concepts. What I have here is an illustration of the various temporary dimension settings. So the default behavior is to go to center, as we were seeing in the other file, but we can change the setting to go to either the finished face or to the core face. We also can change the way it behaves when it comes to openings like doors and windows. The default behavior is to go to the center line of doors, but we can change it to do something more like this, where it goes to the openings of doors. The setting for that is on the Manage tab, on the Additional Settings, all the way down here at the bottom, this command called Temporary Dimensions. Let me just move this dialog out of the way a little bit here. And what you can see is for walls, we have these 4 settings: center lines, finish face, core interior, and we have these 2 settings for doors and windows: center lines and openings. So my preference is for it to actually go to the faces of the walls and the openings of doors and windows. So you'll get this sort of behavior for doors and windows, and you'll be out here at the face for walls. So I'm going to cancel here, go back to my switch windows, go back to my locating walls drawing file, Manage tab again, Additional Settings, Temporary Dimensions, and I'm going to choose Faces and Openings. When I click OK and I select the new wall, you'll now see the difference in behavior. The temporary dimensions are automatically going to the inside faces of the wall now instead of to the centers, which means I can go in and immediately change that number, and it's going to make these modifications move a little bit more quickly. These 2 bathrooms are both 5 feet. This one right here as well. And this closet here, I'll make that 7 feet, and I'll make this 2'6". Now remember to do 2 feet 6. You do 2 space 6, or you do 2 feet 6. So using the temporary dimensions, you can manipulate the positions of the walls. So you sketch and then modify, and you can quickly move the positions of the walls to a more precise location. You can either manually manipulate the witness line grips, or you can use the temporary dimension setting on the Manage tab to change the behavior so that it always goes to the faces of the walls, which is usually a little bit more convenient. So let's take a look at how some of these tools function here in Revit. So I'm in a file called Modifying Walls, and we're going to click over here on the Modify tab. The Modify tab contains all of the tools that we're going to look at here on this Modify panel. I'm going to start with the Move command. Move command has a shortcut of MV. Now I'm going to let the tooltip load here for a second by pausing my mouse over it. And what you'll notice is that a small animation starts to run after a few seconds. So all of the commands on this tool palette have these little animated tooltips, and they can be really helpful to give you a sense of how these commands function. So I encourage you to just take a few moments and pause over each of those and watch the animations. So I'm going to click the Move command. And what you'll see is because I clicked the command first and I don't actually have any selection on screen, the Revit's going to prompt me to make some sort of a selection. If I do it this way, I need to let Revit know that I'm done selecting by pressing the Enter key. Now, this is just one way that we can do it. The alternative is to make your selection first before you click the command, and I'll show you that next, but I want you to see both methods. After I've made the selection and pressed my Enter key, at the status line, it'll say, click to enter the move start point. Now, there's a variety of ways that you can indicate where you want to start moving from and where you want to end up, but in all cases, you're picking 2 points, or you're indicating 2 points. You're indicating how far you want this object to move. In this case, let's say that I wanted to go a distance that was equal to the width of this closet. In that case, I can actually use my object snaps and say I want to go from this endpoint to this endpoint, and the result will be a movement that matches that width. And when I click, you'll see that wall will move by that amount. Now, a really nice thing happens with walls is they stay attached at both ends wherever possible. So Revit tries to keep all of the objects connected to one another. If it can't do that, it'll actually generate an error message and tell you that it can't keep them joined anymore. So that first move I did by selecting the Move command and then having it prompt me for selection. In this case, I've decided that I moved it a little too far. I want to move it back a little bit, and the object is already selected. So now notice that if I click the Move command, it just simply goes right to asking me about where I want to move from and to, because it already has a selection. This tends to be my preference. I tend to prefer to select the object first and then execute the command, but it's really a matter of personal preference. Both achieve the same result. So in this case, I'm going to pick a random point on screen, start moving in the direction that I want to move, and then I can simply type on the keyboard how far I want to move. And maybe I want to go about 2.5 feet. So I'm going to put in 2 space 6, which, as you recall, is one way that we could put 2 foot 6. I could also put 2 foot symbol 6. Either one would work. And now the wall moves back 2 foot 6. Now, if you know how to move, you already know how to copy, because the prompts in the copy command, here's the button, and the shortcut is CO, are exactly the same. Where do you want to copy from, and where do you want to copy to? And I'm just going to do that on screen with 2 clicks. And that'll give me a new wall next to the original. Now I could use Move again to move this wall into the position where I want it. I actually want it down here at the bottom of my plan, or it turns out that at the end of the wall, they actually have these little grip points. So in this case, it might actually be more convenient to just grab that grip and start dragging it until it snaps to the opposite wall. And then I can grab this grip and start dragging it to about right there. Again, either method is fine. If you prefer to move, you can feel free to do the move. There's no right or wrong way to do these things. Let's direct our attention to the Trim and Extend to Corner command next. I'm going to show you a quick example of that. Here it is right here. TR is the shortcut. You use this command to create L conditions. So whenever you want to make a nice corner like we have right here, you can use this command. So for example, if I no longer needed this part of the wall and I wanted to make that L back here, I can select this as my first wall, and then it will prompt me to select my second wall, and I can click right here, and you see it actually trims off that piece right there. Let me repeat it again from here to put it back again. and in that case, it extended the wall. So this command is either a trim or an extend, depending on the 2 points you click. Now I'm going to use it over here to create a small little coat closet. We're going to enter our condo right in this location here, and right here, and here, I want to make a small little coat closet. Now notice that it gives me those little dash green lines to indicate the result. That can be really helpful to make sure you're clicking the right stuff. You want to pay very close attention. How does it know whether or not you're getting this undo or this undo? If you pay close attention to the prompt, it says click on the part you want to keep here or here. And you can see the small little dashed line. So if I want to keep that side, that's the part I click. If I want to keep that side, that's the part. So just keep that in mind as you use this command. Now, I need a small corner over here to enter the unit, and then I want to join that up with this command, and I'll be using trim again for that. But before I can get to the trim, I need to actually create the new wall on the other side. I could do that using any of the methods we've talked about so far. Let's look at offset for that. So the shortcut is OF. Over here on the options bar, I want to make sure I put in the distance that I want to offset. I'm going to use 5 feet in this case. Just put in 5 feet and press enter. And then as you move your mouse around on screen, if you highlight objects, you'll see a small green dashed line appear where it would create the offset copy. So I'm going to highlight this wall right here. Make sure the green dashed line is down because it can go up as well if you move your mouse. So make sure it's going down and then click, and that'll give me the copied wall in the location that I need it. I'll switch to trim and extend. I'm going to select this wall. And again, remember to click the part you want to keep. So click down here, not up here. And when I do that, it will create that nice angled corner. I'm going to cancel out of there with the modify tool. Select this wall. I want to make my living room area here a little bit larger and my kitchen over here a little bit smaller. So I'm going to use temporary dimensions in this case to do that. Click right here. We've already talked about temporary dimensions, and make the living room 12'6". Now, why would I choose temporary dimensions here instead of using the move command? Well, you may have noticed that the dimension I started with was some fractional number. To use the move command effectively and end up at exactly 12'6", I'd have to do the math and I'd have to be somewhat precise. The temporary dimension is a much better job in the case where you know what the final number needs to be. In the case where you know how far you want to move, the move command is usually a better choice. So they're both very effective. It just depends on what you're starting with and where you want to end up. Now, over here, I need a mechanical closet and a small pantry. So I'm going to go to my wall command, and I'm just going to sketch these rooms in like so, and like so. And I'll fine tune and clean that up a little bit later. Click my modify tool to cancel out of there. I want to take this segment of the wall out. There's a few ways I could approach that, but I want to show you a new tool for this purpose, and that is the split tool. So I'm going to click on the split tool, and the way this works is if you click an object, it just simply breaks that into 2 pieces. So if I cancel out of the command with the escape key, you'll see I have one wall here and another wall here. Now, if I did it that way, I'd have to then use my trim and clean up this corner and this corner. What I'm going to do instead is Control-Z to undo that, go back to the split command, and it has an option over here in the options bar called Delete Inner Segment. If I remember to check that first, then it can be a little faster because I'll split it precisely right here at the intersection, and then right here also at the intersection, and it will split out the segment in between. If you forget to do that, it's not a big deal. You can erase it manually or use the trim command as I mentioned, but this can save you a few clicks if you remember to do that. So as you can see, Revit provides many modification tools to make your layout tasks simpler. You're going to want to practice with each one of those and get comfortable with them. You can use them very effectively here in floor plan layouts, but they work anywhere in the Revit software for a variety of purposes. So make sure you're comfortable with as many of these as possible because they will remain an important part of your Revit arsenal.